Hi everyone, good morning and welcome to those of you in the room and those of you online to this opening keynote speech for the first day of our research conference here at the Agriculture, Nutrition and Health Academy's 10th anniversary. It's an incredibly exciting session and I'm delighted to introduce our two speakers who are personal inspirations and whose work I know will speak to our global concerns here at ANH. So in the interconnected fields of agriculture, food systems, nutrition and health, we're trained to really see the linkages between soil quality and crop growth, between food environments and dietary patterns, between diets and disease, in the ongoing linkages throughout health from early childhood development to outcomes throughout the entire life course. But today, the complex, often invisible forces shaping these connections are testing our interdisciplinarity ever more. And as we navigate compounding global crises, including climate change and the rapid destruction of ecosystems and the natural environment, our ability to come together to work collaboratively and collectively is ever more important. And this keynote really explores a powerful but too often masked threat to food systems and public health, that of the far-reaching impacts of large-scale industrial development. And this includes the industries and corporations who are undermining health and driving the global burden of disease through really driving dietary transitions towards ultra-processed foods and unhealthy foods, and at the same time, through their vast pollution and land acquisition and economic consolidation, are really undermining environmental health and community resilience at the same time. And these damages and pollution that includes plastics, industrial chemicals, and greenhouse gas emissions often trace back to the same roots in petrochemical-driven industries and the increasing footprint of agribusiness. And these industries are shaping the policies, markets, and infrastructure that determine who grows foods, how it's processed, and who gets to eat what. And here in Tanzania, the consequences are visible and growing. Consider plastics, for example, emblematic, of course, of the pollution crisis, but also speaking to broader imbalances. And despite the fact that Africa is responsible as a collective for less than 5% of global plastics production and consumption, they are suffering disproportionate burdens from its waste and pollution. And in Tanzania alone, they're struggling to manage over 300,000 tons of plastic waste every year. And much of this comes from the food system itself. And that's undermining sanitation systems, damaging livestock, and polluting fisheries, coastal fisheries. And Tanzania, though, is also really leading the way in terms of strong policy action. So through strong plastic bag bans and through their international engagement at the ongoing negotiations for a global plastics treaty to end plastics pollution. And so there is hope in this image that I'm painting. But plastics, of course, are only one piece of a much larger picture. Petrochemicals underpin every stage of the industrial food supply chain, from fertilizers and pesticides to packaging and transport. And this dependency creates deep ties between agribusiness and fossil fuel interests, reinforcing a system that privileges scale and profit over equity and sustainability. And these power structures are staggering. For example, just two companies now control 40% of global commercial seed markets, a dramatic consolidation from 10 firms just a generation ago. And just 10 food corporations shape much of the global diet, wielding dangerous influence over nutrition and global health. And these stark statistics really demonstrate the erosion of our own agency over our health. And this is especially for the communities that live and work on the fence line of these industries, who have already been subjected to decades and generations of injustice, damages, and abuses of their human rights, not least their human right to health. And speaking directly to this issue, I'm deeply honoured to welcome Joe and Joy Banner, these formidable advocates who are grounded in community action and human rights, but are also operating as leading voices in international policy development, insights from the front line of both local and global environmental justice. And their work reveals how petrochemical and large-scale food industries impact lives, but also how communities can mobilize for accountability, restoration, and justice. And so from Louisiana to Dar es Salaam, the knowledge they bring can really speak to us all across nutrition, agriculture, and health. And Joe and Joy are a reminder to me, but to all of us, I'm sure, that transformation, however hard, is both necessary and possible. So thank you so much, and please join me in welcoming them warmly to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Megan, for that introduction. Actually, I think we can just go home now. You said everything that needed to be said, but thank you for that. And we'd like to thank the organizers for inviting us here today. And we really are honored to be here and participate in this event, to be in Africa as well, and to share this experience with you and to let you all know or inform you about what we are experiencing in Louisiana. So thank you so much once again for having us here. My name again is Jo Banner, and I'm joined by my sister Joy. So we are 10th generation Louisianians. Our family has been in Louisiana in St. John the Baptist Parish for over 300 years. Now, if you know anything about the United States, the communities have counties, but in Louisiana, we have parishes. So parish is the same as a county. We are descendants of the enslaved Africans who were brought to the area, who were kidnapped to the area in the 1700s. So the Descendants Project, when we say descendants, we mainly refer to descendants of the enslaved Africans. And our organization, we are a nonprofit. We champion the voice of the Black descendant community. We believe that by supporting and improving the Black descendant community, not only do we improve, but all the other communities around us also improve. So it's really our mission is to make sure that our community, which has been sacrificed, for lack of a better word, for generations, that we can finally supply the support that these communities need, not only to be healthy, but to also have happy lives. So our work involves environmental justice, climate justice, food justice, which is one I just added, because as much as we are, our history has been defined by food, we don't really think so much about food justice, but being in this space made me really just like light bulb moment. It's all really about food in many senses. And of course, racial justice. We also have historic and cultural preservation. Our organization really started off as historic and cultural preservation in the sense, almost like a tourist commission that was run by Black descendants. But as we began our work, we realized we can't just talk about historic and cultural preservation, the buildings and our culture without supporting the people. So that became a real major part of our mission. It always was that, but we really defined it as part of our mission. And here is some of the things that we are fighting for in our community. We want to make sure that as we have the discussion, we also want to share with you why we love our home. And so in the middle, you'll see this oak tree that's part of our property. It's about 300 to 500 years old, and Joy and I get to experience being with our tree and also other parts of nature every single day. In fact, we have so many animals, so many birds. I like to walk outside and have my Zoom calls outside sometimes, but the birds are so loud that I have to go inside. So there's some noise, and oftentimes I appreciate their singing, but also it can be a bit loud.
Oh, okay. This is, you want to continue on this?
Yes, so we wanted to see, here are some pictures of me and John when we were younger. We've noticed that twins are quite a big thing here in Africa. So we have been stopped many times and asked if we were twins. And so we actually threw these pictures in here at the last to show you the history of twins we also have in our family. The first picture is me, Joy, and my grandmother. And the second picture below that is actually me, other twin cousins. So there's five sets of multiples in one generation in a set of triplets. So the cousins next to us are actually two identical girls and their brother in the middle. So there's a lot of twins in our little part of Louisiana.
And yes, we also in this picture we have our great grandparents, Nobia and Laurent, Alexis, and we have them here again as evidence of what we love and what we are fighting for. And what is significant about them to us, not only the fact that they are our family, is that our neighborhood in Louisiana was actually founded by them. And so from their land purchases and also from my great uncle, we have a neighborhood that is made up of our family. And so we grew up around people that we loved, and we especially wanted to include that picture of our grandmother because she was the one especially that instilled in us this love of history and culture. She was a big proponent of folklore. So we would, in the evenings, sit around with our elders, and she would tell us of tales. Our favorite was of Campalapin, which is rabbit. Which has historical ties to West Africa. And so we realize now in just the folklore and the food ways, our family's background in gardening and farming, that has deep roots to our African, West African cultures, which is something that we especially appreciate and love. And so again, it's really the inspiration why we do this work. And we have a pretty intense environment that we're working in, but the love of our community and the love of our traditions is what keeps us inspired to continue doing this work. And
well, I want to just, first of all, I want to ask, how many of you have heard of St. John the Baptist Parish in Louisiana?
oh, 2 people. Wow, 2 more than I expected.
How many of you have heard of the city of New Orleans? Yeah, quite a few more. So we are less than 1 hour away from New Orleans and St. John the Baptist Parish. That's not by coincidence, that is by design. So for the next part of our presentation, Joy will start and give us more information about how we have that location and where this slide comes from. So Joy, can you?
Yeah, so most of what, quite a few more of you knew of New Orleans. Most of you didn't know about St. John the Baptist Parish. We are located about less than an hour from New Orleans in what is known as the German coast. And so according to the researcher Ellen C. Merrill, this quote, the German settlement became the only dependable source of fresh foodstuffs. On more than one occasion, the German coast farmers saved the city, New Orleans, from starvation continuing to be the breadbasket of the colony. So we're here talking about nutrition, and now we're talking about bread. What this caption does not mention is that the German immigrants who settled in Louisiana, who settled in this part, most of them had enslaved labor, the Africans. It was determined early on from the colony that the Germans would be the ones with the land and growing the farms and having the wealth, but it would be the Africans who were enslaved. And when we talk about the food and nutrition, and the reason why the colony isn't starving is because the West Africans that were trafficked over had the knowledge of growing rice and growing enough rice to support the colony. But again, in a lot of Louisiana history, in a lot of your history of New Orleans, it doesn't talk about the river parishes, the German colonies, and they don't talk about the contributions of the Africans or the labor that was stolen from the Africans and their descendants. So here is a picture of Louisiana. And so our community, so there is as Baton Rouge over on that end, and you can see New Orleans. Our parish of St. John the Baptist is actually in the middle between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. There's a lake that is alongside the river and that's where we are situated. I recently found this map. I thought it'd be appropriate for this setting. Sorry, it's not clearer, but I couldn't find a digital copy. This is a picture of a physical copy. But if you can see the legend, it describes the type of food that is grown, or resources that are grown around the state. So you have a little cow for cattle. You have cotton that was in the state. You have a tiny bit of fruit that's being grown. But what you do see more of is when there's even some soybeans. You can see the little fish around Louisiana for the seafood, and even have some little rice that's there. But what you mostly see, those little white rectangles, that's sugar. So along the river between Baton Rouge, you see how as we start coming through the southern part of the state, how you start seeing some of those, more of those sugar packets. That is because that is just mostly grown in our community. There's lots of still sugarcane fields. You will also see there are oil rigs along the coast of Louisiana and natural gas. So I thought this was really interesting in depicting what kind of agriculture that we have in the state of Louisiana. So next is my beautiful community, the Freetown of Wallace, Louisiana. So this is where specifically we are situated. This is an overview shot. And you can also see not only how, in my opinion, how beautiful and how green it is. We're right by the Mississippi River. That's the levee that you see that is holding the river in place, or attempting to hold the river in place. And you also see the way that the land is designed in almost as patchwork. So those patches of field, those are the sugarcane fields. So this is where our neighborhoods are located. In the midst of these sugarcane fields, we have these communities. The reason why it's called the Freetown is because these communities alongside plantation fields were actually are developed by people that were formerly enslaved, who fought directly and indirectly for their freedom during the Civil War, came back, created communities, created financial co-ops, really, purchased land, and were able to establish these communities. So that's why they are called free towns. The community of Wallace, this is Whitney Plantation. So the fields that you saw, so these fields are actually a part of this plantation, which is about a half a mile away from us. This is Whitney Plantation. So this is where our ancestors were, and this is one of the plantations where our ancestors were enslaved. So the majority of the African descended people in Louisiana come from one or more of the plantations that are along the Mississippi River. This one, Whitney Plantation, like others, are museums or visitor sites. Whitney is significant because it is one of only a couple now that actually center slavery and the role of slavery in Louisiana's history. And I was their director of communications for 6 years at Whitney. So I take pride in the work because, again, that was something that really intentional about making sure that not only the enslaved people were centered, but the descendant community. And it's one of the reasons why we created the Descendants Project. Okay, and so this is when we talk about the link between petrochemicals and plantations. This map is the most illustrative example of that connection. So each yellow dot represents one of the plantations. That squiggly line, blue squiggly line in the middle, is the Mississippi River. The red dots are the petrochemical facilities. So you can see almost a one-to-one relationship ratio to the plantations to petrochemicals. The petrochemical or heavy industrial facilities sometimes even retain the name of the plantation that they're in the footprints of. So you see this pathway of the petrochemical, the plantations, the connection. So in our history, as a community that is alongside these plantations, those Freetown communities, we get targeted by industry all the time. It's that Mississippi River, which goes out into the Gulf, and then goes and it allows trade throughout the Atlantic. That's really where the capitalism structures are still present, and that economy is still present. And so for us, we're always combating some type of industrial development that's targeting us. So 30 years ago, and you can see 1992, we were able to prevent a plastics corporation, Formosa, from coming in and displacing our community. And so from this article, the little guy was a driving force in halting Formosa, foes say. And then there's a timeline of what happened from March 1989 to October 1992. Joe and I were maybe 9 or 10 years old, and we remember when our community was targeted by Formosa. And so my grandmother that you saw in one of the earlier pictures, we remember as kids coming home from school, and we would stay with our grandparents until my parents came home from work. And Formosa's executives were in the yard with my grandparents having conversation about the plastics plant, and and telling them, well, it's going to come anyway. Your parish president wants it, but trust us, we'll make sure that you get the top dollar for your housing, and we'll make sure that your houses aren't torn down. We'll use them for corporate headquarters. And so if you go into Louisiana today, you'll see a lot of what looks like residential homes. They once were residential homes for families. Now they've been taken over by corporations and actually have been used for headquarters. But anyway, we were successful in that fight. In this process, though, the land was zoned to industrial, which becomes a problem for us 30 plus years later. So in 2021, our community was targeted by a grain terminal operation. And so that is a picture of it, a rendering that we had drawn up, because when we say grain, and maybe most of you, because we're in a different audience that's more associated, when we say grain, most people have a almost a pastoral, peaceful, like amber waves of grain, like, wow, what could be so terrible about that? Those structures are at least 300 feet tall, so as tall as our Statue of Liberty. Those white towers, those are 50 grain silos. That infrastructure that you see on the top goes straight to the Mississippi River. And so in the little pink building in the corner, that is actually I'm pointing here, but it's actually our cafe in our community of Wallace. So there's no way that we would be able to live next to this thing, right? But we fought for almost 4 years, mainly against industrial zoning, to prevent this plant from coming into our community, and we won. We got them to pull their plans. We argued for the historical protection of not only just plantations, but also Black descendant communities that are free towns. And so that was a huge win for us. So you're saying, well, okay, great. That's 2 battles that you have won, right? And you've prevented these industries from coming into your sugarcane fields. However, we're still stuck with sugarcane fields. And as much as I love the culture, this is a video from the inside of my house.
But by the way, our neighbor who's next door to us is recovering from cancer. So she had a rare form of cancer, and thankfully she's doing a lot better. But that is what's happening next to her house. She's in the trailer next door to us.
And we're not sure what that is being sprayed, if it's fertilizer or it's pesticide. If the cane is growing at a quick rate, they'll put something on it to stop it from growing. Then there's other times where they are perpetuating or speeding up the growth.
And on that street alone, by the way, there was two homes, and there's at least 4 people with cancer on that one street next to us.
And in this last video, that is the blessing of the graves at our church parish. What you see in the background is smoke from the sugarcane being burned. So this is also another part of living next to sugarcane. And just lastly, when we talk about this legacy of slavery, after the free labor ended, there needed to be a different way of cultivating sugarcane. And that's where the fertilizers and the pesticides came in. So many of the plantations, not only did they change from sugarcane to other petrochemicals, but the fertilizers also became one of the key chemicals that were being produced. And I think that is my part. So I'm going to hand it back over to Joe.
And just the burning of the sugarcane is, it's of course to get the excess waste from it. but I didn't realize it's also to burn the chemicals from the soil so that it's not oversaturated. So the purpose is to release those chemicals. Many of you probably know this already, but this was news to me. So it's really scary to have this happening. So the bread basket continues. The researcher who we started with the bread basket begins also wrote this phrase here: the lure of steady jobs, paid vacations, and benefits further enhance the desirability of working in industry as opposed to being out in the field and facing the unpredictable forces of Mother Nature. Workers came willingly and in large numbers to the newcomers of St. Charles Parish, which is next door to us. Although the breadbasket would be filled with new foods, the people of the German coast would continue to feed the region in America. So the breadbasket continues, which she's referring to is all of these different plants that are on this diagram. It's hard to see, but all those lines are representing the different chemicals that are being produced in our area and the different plants that are there. So our new breadbasket is industry or chemical and petrochemical. We are in the river parishes of Louisiana, has over 200 plants that are in some way, shape, or form centered around plastic production and the chemicals that make it. And for our community, we are in the life cycle of plastic. The major harm to our health comes from the upstream production of plastic. So it's upstream, midstream, and downstream. Now, often when we discuss plastic production, we discuss the downstream, which is the waste management. That's the trash washing up on the beach. That's the water bottles. That's the poor turtle with its straw in its nose. And that was really the point, the impetus that draw a lot of attention to it. But we also really want to share that from a fence line community, from the upstream production of plastic, is where we are getting our community is really being harmed. So here's a graphic from Break Free from Plastic, which is a coalition that Joy and I are part of, that shows the different stages on the plastic pollution life cycle. So we have extraction, we have the plastic production. I think they should also put a little graphic for petrochemical production, because if you don't know it, you don't understand the link between the two. But the point of sale, dumping and burning, waste industry, and then also consumers. I'm sorry, our slides might have gotten missed. So that same area that we are a part of, St. John the Baptist Parish, it's known as Louisiana's Cancer Alley. That's because our communities have extraordinarily high rates of cancer. We have the highest risk in the country, 97 percentile of cancer risk to 99 percentile of cancer risk. So sometimes it's 7 to 1,000 times higher than other parts of the country. We have these different chemicals that are being produced, ethylene oxide, methane, benzene, and all of that is having a really dreadful impact on our health. Now, we say Cancer Alley, but we really could be called low birth rate alley, asthma alley, heart attack alley, anxiety alley, sleep deprivation alley. We face all of these things, right? But we are definitely Cancer Alley is the one that really sticks out to people's mind. There's hardly anyone in our community that hasn't been personally impacted by cancer. It's just a norm. We have people who have breast cancer one time, 2 times, different types of cancer. Joy, one of our relatives visited us, and he asked us, like, did y'all get your mammograms? And we're like, yeah. And he said, well, make sure you get your mammogram because it's really hard to have breast cancer. He's a breast cancer survivor. He had to have a double mastectomy. He then informed us that his neighbor, one street over from him, called him and asked who was his doctor because he also had breast cancer. And that's just to show you the extreme that we're facing in Louisiana. So here is a graphic that I received that I pulled from the Shell website, so did not change this in any way, but it shows you our new bread basket and what's happening in Louisiana. And this is over the last 100 years, and as you can see, 299,000 barrels of oil per day. 50% of the Shell U.S. production is in Louisiana, per their stats, 2,500 miles of pipeline. This is also 2019. It's probably even more now since we're in 2025. Almost 500,000 barrels of crude per day, and that's convict narco refineries. That's in Cancer Alley, right there specifically. And then world's largest single AO producer, the ethylene production, the Shell cracker is the largest that Shell has in our area. This is also Shell in Louisiana. This was after Hurricane Ida in 2021. There's other plants too, but one of those plants are the Shell plant in Narco. Those flares are burning up the chemicals after the plants have been shut down because we lost electricity for, I think, about 3 weeks. 2 to 3 weeks. And when you have a situation like this, there was a way to also, you need to burn those chemicals off because it's dangerous. It's dangerous either way, but this supposedly will stop an explosion. So there's a community in between this. As you can see, this man is out walking his dogs. After a hurricane, when we lose electricity, we are often outside because we're trying to cool down. So we have even more exposure to the chemicals because of our lack of electricity during those times. And here's another, I'm picking on Shell, but they had all the information on their website. So I just want to share this with you. And just to also to be honest with you, our family, our parents work in industry. And so it's very common to have people like us in Cancer Alley who are a part of this industry and very much are familiar with our dad. When he would come home from work, he would have the little plastic pellets in his uniform. And it wasn't until recently that as we started to talk more about plastic and the damage and working for it, that I put it all together like, oh, wow, my dad was working for a plastics plant. But it's just because we didn't know. And back then it was a different time. We know now, but just wanted to be honest and transparent. But here's something that I pulled from the Shell's website recently. From plastic films to milk jugs, the food and beverage packaging market continues to grow like never before. At Shell Polymers, we understand the need to keep up with this demand by producing consistent and high quality polymers that keep consumers safe. Through our LLDPE and HDPE, we can help converters maximize shelf life and meet consumer expectations for sanitary, secure, and sustainable polymer packaging. Now, did y'all just see that slide I showed before? How sanitary does that look? But that's what we're using, that's what we're covering our food with. So food packaging generates over 82 million tons of plastic waste in the United States, and over 100 billion plastic bags are used annually in U.S. supermarkets. I have this pictures. I found this boiled egg in South Korea. That's one boiled egg, and it comes in its own little individual plastic container. So why does a boiled egg need a plastic container? But here we go. So these are the reason why my community, this is why my community is getting sick, so that boiled eggs can have their own plastic container. But I want to make sure that I don't want us to think that this is a consumer problem. This is a producer and a supplier problem. We consumers, we cannot fight this until producers stop producing the plastic. Over 100 billion plastic bags are used. We just heard from Megan mention the bag bans that are in place, or the charges. These are things that can get us away from using so much plastic. And we hear this a lot, right? Reduce, reuse, recycle. And you see this, right? This plastic circularity myth. Plastic is not circular because a plastic bottle, when recycled, does not become a plastic bottle. The plastic degrades. And so that plastic bottle can never be a plastic bottle again. But we're led to believe that when you use a plastic bottle and you recycle it, guess what? It becomes another plastic bottle. Also, with recycling, there's multiple types of plastic on your bottles or in your product. So a plastic bottle has actually 3 different types of plastic, at least 3. The cap, the label, and the bottle itself. And they cannot be recycled together. So it's very difficult. Recycling is very difficult. And even if it is recyclable, it still has the same amount of toxins in it. That doesn't change. Sustainable plastic is something we're hearing a lot of. I still have no idea what sustainable plastic is, but it's something we're hearing a lot from the industry, the producers. Also, essential plastic. What is essential plastic? We still aren't really hearing those definitions. And I think as we're arguing this, if plastic is essential, let's get a list of what we think is essential, but we haven't really, it's hard to have that list. So we're part of, Joy and I have been part of the Plastic Pollution Treaty. I know that is not the name, it's very long, but this is what I call it in my head. So the United Nations, and hopefully you've heard about this process that's happening. The world is getting, member states are getting together, some, in order to finally figure out a solution to plastic. So this really started off as a waste management type of treaty negotiation. It was from a communities pushing and environmental justice delegations going into where we're trying to make this as upstream as possible, from extraction to the chemicals coming out to all of that. So it is as expansive as we need it to be, and also as ambitious. We advocate must cap plastic production. At least we must start there. This artwork was one of the exhibits that's been at a couple of the treaty negotiations. If any of you have been a part of it, you probably recognize this. And no treaty is better than a weak treaty, is our argument. There are many people who want to water it down and make sure it's not as ambitious, but we're pushing to make sure we have the safeguards for our community. Industry players, industry make about 20 to 30% of the participants who are involved in the negotiations. And what's also difficult for us is some of these industry players are in as delegations. So while we have a little orange badge, they get a red badge, which gives them access to many of the discussions that we're not able to be a part of and intervene when necessary. Also, the false solutions of recycling, plastic recycling, chemical recycling, and circularity is a big one that we also must fight against. So plastics contain over 16,000 chemicals in its product, and we fight for non-toxic reuse systems. Just to say, plastic is one type of pollution, but in Cancer Alley, we also have pollution from aluminum and we have a pollution from steel. So no matter what solution that we can come up with, there's always going to be a fence line community that will suffer from that solution. If you're producing it, it's going to cause some negative impact. So we really, what we must produce, or we stress reuse, reduction, but reuse as much as possible so that we're not having to use resources of land and water or harm on biodiversity for our products. And here is a postcard that of a campaign that we made, and it has a picture of Louisiana, and it shows what we love about our community, but it's also showing an honest depiction of the pollution that we're facing. So we take these postcards with us when we are in the UN spaces, and we hand it out to negotiators and also to produce them. Come to the fence line, come to our communities and see what plastic production looks like. So it's one way that we just try to encourage as much visitation to our fence line communities as possible. And here's a graphic I just wanted to show you of the different types of material items that were coming in through our port of Louisiana, port of South Louisiana. You can see we have soybeans, we have petrochemicals, we have chemical fertilizers, the crude oil, the maize. This is one port in our area. That's also the port of Baton Rouge, the port of New Orleans, the port of Lake Charles. But this is what we are, just the numbers from one of those ports that we have here. And climate vulnerability, St. John the Baptist Parish was actually, we were ranked as the #1 most climate vulnerable county in the United States. That's out of 70,000 counties that were measured, and they used, I think, 180 different factors. So not only are our communities facing extreme sickness, we also have to deal with climate vulnerability that's associated with that. Here's a graphic, the hurricane that you see, that's Hurricane Ida that came in 2021. We rode that storm out. It was only supposed to be a Category 2 storm, not only, but for us, Category 2 is something that's more manageable. It ended up being a Category 3 to 4, and it was, I think, 14 hours is how much we had to endure really strong winds and rain and all of that. So we are facing more and more of these type of storms as the Gulf gets warmer, as it heats up. The intensity is growing in our area. As we have land loss, we're also losing buffer zones to diminish that, the power of that. So, Joy, do you want to take this part over?
Yes. So the picture in the corner with me and the ugly cry is I'm hugging our scientist, a scientist that works at Tulane Environmental Law Clinic. And when we heard that our community was being threatened by a grain terminal, I instantly contacted her. Tulane Environmental Law Clinic had been present throughout Louisiana in the river parishes in Cancer Alley doing work, and her reputation was outstanding as a community supporter. So I reached out to her, and she was the one who let us know about the permitting process and gave us an upper hand in this fight. Because as soon as the permit request came in, Kim notified me. Because we were able to fight that grain terminal, and also as a result of Kim Terrell's most recent study, that the jobs, the bread from the bread basket that was promised to Black communities, which persuaded a lot of us that we should sacrifice our air and our health and our way of life because we're going to get the benefits of these jobs. As Black community members, we were understanding and seeing that the numbers weren't quite adding up to us. So Kim Terrell did the study and found that we were exactly right. That even though we were giving up so much, and that these petrochemical facilities and heavy facilities were being targeted in our communities, we were not getting the jobs, the good plant jobs. We were overrepresented in the lower paying jobs and underrepresented in the executive and leadership and management jobs. As a result of that, from what we hear, the governor, as well as Tulane University, the dean of the law school, has been putting a lot of pressure on Tulane Environmental Law Clinic to not engage in such controversial studies. Kim's study was peer-reviewed article. I'm a former business professor, so I know how important it is to have a peer-reviewed article. And they didn't challenge her methodology, her assumptions, her theories, her statistics. They just said this topic is inconvenient and it's threatening other developments, and as our state politicians don't like it. So as a result, she resigned a couple of weeks ago, citing again censorship of pollution and specific racial disparity research. And just to add to that, I think is really interesting as we think about this history of slavery and its legacies. The research finding that really aggravated and irritated the politicians that be, and the grain terminal was another one that again really alarmed our politicians. But that link between labor and race, right? When Kim found through her studies that there was this disparity where, Black people were not getting the quote unquote jobs of labor. That was, to me, the secret that no one wanted to get out. And I can't help but, to think about, again, those connections to labor, quality of life, and the expectations that if you are not laboring for somebody else, then you don't have any value, right? And what we are doing as a Descendants Project is to uplift the fact that as human beings, we have value, and I as part of the environment and the natural world, that has value too. So we're trying to, to talk about and disconnect these links between personal worth, value, and labor. And then lastly, too, we have this recent law. Louisiana stifles a community air monitoring. So we are not able to report on the air monitoring that is being done in our communities. We have 3 different air monitors, but there are certain restrictions that is by the legislature that we can't report on them. We can't connect it to a source, or we face up to $32,000 a day in fines, up to $1 million. So despite the fact that we have air monitors that are stronger, that pick up more chemicals, that are EPA funded in many parts through grants. We're not able to report on them because we could face a $32,000 a day fine for reporting on our findings.
Yeah, we partner with Johns Hopkins University, so we have very sophisticated instrumentation, and actually is better than what, at least in my opinion, but it's the scientists or the EPA has, and way more sensitive. But we cannot communicate that data, or else, as Joyce said, we could get fined for that. And we have tried, we have gone to our legislature, we've asked for additional air monitoring for the plant so that we would have alerts when there was a chemical leak. It would cost about $15,000 per plant to have the monitors that we needed in place. And we had some of our legislators say that sure, was some of the big industry could have it, but what about the mom and pop plant? They won't be able to afford the $15,000. There's no such thing as a mom and pop plant. But anyway, yeah. So this is how when we are able to intervene, we still have the law against us in many cases.
And we have filed a lawsuit as well, and many of the wins that you see here has had to go through litigation. So then we have to go through the court system, and then we get charged with abusing the legal system and filing frivolous lawsuits, right? We cannot go to our local governance, our counties, because that's all just proliferated with industry. It's all captured by corporations. So then we have to resort to filing lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit in order to get in order to be able to follow the law or to protect, in this case, our First Amendment rights.
It's also why the UN space is so important to us, because it's easier for us to go to Geneva than actually to go 15 miles away from our home and talk to the government there. So we have to intervene internationally as best as we can.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is, sorry, y'all, I'm going the wrong way. Sorry. Oh, sorry to go back, but I just threw this in there. Here is one of the flares that's in our community is kind of stalling. But anyway, you can see what we have there.
Yeah. And these flares are getting brighter and louder. As we can see those flares from longer distances away. Sometimes at night, it almost seems like the sun is shining, and so it's scary to have a trajectory where we're living in the problem, and you literally can see it. You can smell it, you can hear it. All of your senses are activated by a problem that is getting worse. But then yet now we're told that it's all safe. Right, there is nothing that you are sacrificing. Everything's fine. But yes, we can. Again, you don't. I appreciate the scientists, but you don't need scientists, right? It's common sense when you are living in that environment.
Yeah, and I'm sorry we had one more slide because we wanted to end on a positive note, but we did not want to end with a flare going off. But anyway, such is our life, just to make sure you really get it. But we are working with our communities. We have a Liberation Labyrinth Garden. We are purchasing land. We have purchased 2 plantation homes so that we can shift the narrative and use these spaces that have harmed Black communities as something that can benefit these communities too. So we have a website, thedescendants.org. It has a lot of our initiatives there on it, but we are really we're working towards a better future for our community and to heal Cancer Alley. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe and Joy, for such a powerful speech, and I'm sure you all benefited from hearing their experiences and their expertise across so many different domains and really tying together for us in this interdisciplinary space so many different threads of environmental and human rights abuses, of injustice, of racial disparities, and big industry. So we're going to open up now for some Q&A. We've got people in the room and people online, and we'll start with any questions from in the room. But I'd just like to draw attention to, there was such a powerful ending to your session, and one I think that really crosses borders is just a few days ago, a couple of communities from Nigeria that amount to no more than 50,000 people have successfully taken Shell to court in the UK after a decade of fighting in their own countries. So I think a lot of the messages that you bring is something that's a shared experience across countries. So thank you. And yes, please raise your hand, and we have some mics in the room for anyone wanting to ask questions over there.
Hello, good morning. My name is Fiorella Picchioni. I'm from the University of Bristol. Thank you very much for your intervention. It was really inspirational. I would like to ask you to maybe talk us about alternative modes of food production, alternative to industrial agricultural production fueled by pesticides and fertilizers. And this type of industrial development in agriculture is something that is shown as the only solution in Sub-Saharan Africa and most of the global South as a solution for food security and economic growth. So what can we do to kind of counterbalance that discourse? And also what can communities, scientific communities such as the ANH Academy do to support communities on the ground that are fighting for food justice and racial equality? Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's a really good question. So my mom grew up in St. John the Baptist Parish, in between the space where the plantation economy was not as strong, because it's after the Civil War and before industrial development. My mom, who grew up during segregation, during Jim Crow laws, had a better options of food, and I would say a better quality of life, because at that time the communities were small. People were farming, they were producing their own foods, they were taking care of the community, right? And so even in the midst of so much going on in the United States, racially wise, my mom again had so much more options than I did in 2025. And so I think that speaks to, when we talk about communities and how can we provide food for us, is not scaling up, is scaling back, right? And detaching from capitalism, right? And shareholders. It is, what do you need to do to provide for your community, right? We did it before. You know, we had with land ownership, we had so many different diverse foods, vegetables, different animals, and we had a community that was much healthier. So I think instead of always thinking about how do we grow these huge industrial scales, it really needs to become more localized. Joe, I think returning to utilizing indigenous and local knowledge is really important too. Also finding ways that we can, when there's drought, what's causing the drought, what's happening to the soil, or when we have too much water, what we're finding out, because we are also working, as I said, with different food ways, right? We find that there's often sometimes ways that you can use design your landscape to where it can retain water or it can drain water quicker. The diversity of the crops that you have there also can make a difference. So we're learning this knowledge as well. The fact that we know or we turn to this and we ask communities, not just for their knowledge, we also respect the people and care for them as well, I think is the way forward. And I think of innovation, or we always want to innovate ourselves out of problems. Sometimes it's about simplifying our ways out of a problem. And what can we take away that will help us instead of what was added on or created?
Thank you for this intervention. I'm Ahmed Kaplan from Wise Consultant Group. I really like the example that you showed, the one egg in a plastic container, as an example of the whole view of agri-food industry, food systems or agri-food systems, and overlap interaction with the different industry. It is a system overview. And that brings to question the need to think beyond the plastics and toward more sustainable food packaging. Yes, there is a need for packaging for food safety reason, for ease of transport, etc. But we need to think beyond the traditional method of packaging into sustainable packaging, as well as your example of how is that really affecting our environment in a negative way. What is in your views are potential application or overlap between what you see in Louisiana to other communities across sub-Saharan Africa as a whole region? Thank you.
I think of packaging and what's sustainable packaging, and of course, plastic is never needed. But also, what are we eating in the life? Should we be eating fruit and vegetables that's out of season to us? The more food, if I have to get my food from all the way across the country, that means I'm gonna have to have more packaging, and I'm eating it out of season, and I'm not relying on the local farmers to help me. So to me, it's like we do focus on packaging, but it's an overall system. It's a breakdown of the fact that a community locally cannot provide the nutrition that's needed for its community. So there's probably water issues, land issues, right issues. All of that has to be impacted before we look at the packaging. And I want to say, I use that egg example as a shock, but really, how much sense does it make to use a plastic straw? I mean, we can drink without a plastic straw. Does it really make sense to use a plastic bag? All of that is kind of crazy plastic too. I use that as an example, but just finding out those ways, but how much packaging, what do we really need and what do we need it for? And I think too, we have to stop thinking about the replacement, to the one-to-one replacement, right? Though I think if you're just trying to switch out one material for another, then you're not thinking high enough in the system. There is a larger problem that needs to be solved. And again, the way that we eat foods, where the food is coming from, there's a lot of food in the world, and maybe, like you having access to it is not going to be beneficial for certain communities. And if we're more knowledgeable about that, and we are encouraged to grow the foods or produce the items that are better for our communities, we can balance that out.
Thank you. I think because we've got questions coming thick and fast now, that we might take a couple at the same time. So we had one to start there at the back, one here, and next one there as well. Thanks. I'll hand over my mic.
Hello. Thank you so much for your presentation. My name is Francis from the African Nutrition Society and the International Union of Nutritional Sciences. I worry a lot about the pollution, not only in certain parts of the world, but across the world. And whether people think that because it's not happening in their area, they are not worried. But when there's a release of gases into the troposphere and later on into the stratosphere, does this not spread across? That people don't really bother, that it's not happening in my patch. And what you are doing is very brave, but also of great importance for me in the part of the world that I come from, is illegal mining. And we see the proliferation of cancers, the effect that this illegal mining and all the release, the pollutants, are having on our food basket, having on our water bodies, and how it gets transported, not only within my country, but beyond my country. And it has to be a groundswell effort so that there's a collective move by people to say that enough is enough. And I think that you are doing a great job. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much. Hi, thank you. Yeah, also really inspirational. My name's Heather. I work in climate and health at the Wellcome Trust. I wanted to ask about, it sort of builds on the first question, but around these narratives of almost quite black and white narratives of we have to do things this way in order to feed the world. It's quite binary. And one example here that I see in food system is around food waste and plastics and packaging. And it's often discussed that, well, actually, if we moved away from certain types of packaging, then we would have more food waste and then we would have more emissions, et cetera, et cetera. So, and I think, in different parts of the world, that is at different stages of the system. So there's sort of the consumption stage to retail stage in some parts of the world, but actually increasingly on farm in terms of sort of providing facilities and options on farm to prevent food waste for farmers, which will get worse in a changing climate. And I'm wondering if you have any suggestions around how can we sort of shift that narrative to move away from this black and white? Can we move past that? Do you have any experience of actually, how do we manage those trade-offs?
One more and I think we can hold that one.
Thank you so much for your wonderful presentations, Joe and Joy. Super interesting and inspiring. You mentioned the false solutions that the companies are putting forward. And Coca-Cola in my own country, Australia, last year had a big campaign about using 10% less plastic in each of its bottles. While if you look at Coca-Cola's corporate report, it was planning to grow its sales 10% every year. And it's the same with the petrochemical companies. The UN Plastics Treaty Conference, they go there with these promises. They plan to triple plastic output by 2050. I mean, logic is not compatible. So I guess my question is, how do we delegitimize those false promises? How do we do that collectively? How do we disrupt that ideological power that the companies have to put forward these false solutions? Thanks.
Great questions. And I'll start with the last one because like I say, I'm a recovering marketing professor. So as Coca-Cola always, they're so funny. We're being told that this is a demand problem. Like consumers, if you just stop demanding it, right? But then you look at their marketing reports and you look at their sales report, and there's obviously an intention to grow their sales, right? So like your marketing report does not hold true. So I think that's one of the keys. And Joe does a good job of finding the information that is already out there that contradicts what they're saying in these spaces and actually calling them out on it. I think that's a good strategy. And, you know, like with Coca-Cola, they seem, or they act like they're so powerless, but, you know, I remind people that literally the Santa Claus that we are used to was Coca-Cola's creation. So if you have the power to invent Santa Claus for the world, then literally you can do anything, right? It's just kind of reminding people using the information that's already out there, the information that's going to their investors, and bringing that information into spaces when you are negotiating.
And I'll take the first question of how do we reduce the food waste on farms and what can we do to share that? I think for me, it is, I'm astounded about how much fruit is produced from one little small tree. And then it's a crime that people are going hungry. Mm-hmm. So we are trying to figure out like, what network can we make to where we're all not overproducing, but what can we produce and then we can share it out. So I think it's also about having a capitalist system. I mean, getting away from the capitalist system. And what co-ops can we use? How can we share the food without having a dollar figure attached to it, but having a value figure attached to it? How can we share? And that may seem, it's so counter of what we are taught, but it's really the fact that it's the greed of it all. And we're taught this greedy system of we need it all. And then we'd rather see it wasted instead of sharing it or giving it to somebody who needs it. A person who is hungry is not lazy. A person who is hungry is not someone who just doesn't have the motivation. It's because they need help. I mean, they need help, and they need help. And it's a human right, right? It's a human right to have healthy food, healthy water, but it's being on this planet. You don't have to deserve it. You should just have it. And I think like getting in that mindset of really saying what we need to share, not just make a profit off of it, we will have a better life. So I'm sorry, that's maybe not the strategic plan, and we're working on that, but it's that mindset that we need of breaking away from of defining value by dollars.
And I think part of that is, thank you. And trusting the local communities and trusting, again, indigenous communities who have knowledge of their foodways and their land. I will tell you that the biggest strengths that we've had, the victories that we have had in our communities fighting and pushing back is understanding, I don't care how big and scary that corporation that is targeting your town is, they do not have as much knowledge as you do. When you know your land, when you know your natural resources, there are people in our community who understand the bayous, where the eagles' nests are, where the ancient Indian mounds are, right? How deep the river is. That is knowledge that gives you power. And companies come in and try to make you think that you don't have that knowledge. But again, trusting in the fact that we on the ground, on the fence line, that we do have the wisdom to be able to take care of ourselves, which again goes against a lot of, principles of for us, I'll be honest, with race, right? That we cannot do for ourselves, that we have to be dependent on someone else. That is halting a lot of the progress. Even if, as nonprofits, even funding, like in many cases, instead of funding directly the frontline people who have the knowledge, it might have to go through this organization who regrants it to another organization to regrant it. What we've been able to fight in our communities, right? If we had that money, we would take care of it. And what happens in Louisiana happens around the world. Like, and going back to the first question about how many of you eat sugar? I know you can admit it. I know at a nutrition conference, you always, right? And grain, right? Those are part of our diet. That is being grown in our communities in Mississippi that have mercury emitting plants and all of these chemicals, all the flares that you've seen that is going into that sugar. That is going, if there's cows being raised, those cows are breathing it. You don't know where that beef is coming from or where that sugar is coming from or where that grain is coming from, right? So you take care of what happens in Louisiana. You help us save that land from industrialization. And by the way, we are planning on buying the land of where that grain terminal and the Formosa plastics plants. We just need $30 million. So if you could start the collection right over here. By the time you get to the end of the room, $30 million. Okay, we can do it. Yes. Anyway.
Thank you both so much. And just thank Frances as well for your comment and reminding us that a lot of these resources are coming from the ground, and pollution and the environmental and health risks are starting so far upstream and often hidden from view. But really also, as Joe mentioned, with plastics production, we kind of put it in that bucket, but actually that contains many different stages, all of which are polluting and risking health along the full plastics life cycle and the life cycle of many other materials too. I think we've got time for just a few more questions. I know we've got a burning one at the front and one over there, please. We'll take another 3 at once, if that's okay with you too.
Sure.
Perfect, thank you.
Right, thanks. I can ask a question now. So I acknowledge that you said this is a producer problem, a supplier problem, and not really a consumer problem. But I still want to understand if you could articulate what a model citizen would do to I mean, we need change at the systemic level, and we recognize that. But what do you think the consumer can do from the ground up? Because it is so easy to fall prey to the myths about this is recyclable, this is 100% reusable, and so on. So that's my question.
For me, it is, and I don't want to take any of the onus off of us as consumers. And I just want to stress that the way that plastic is being produced and other items, our interventions, unfortunately, don't have as much impact as it needs to. But what I try to do for myself anyway, is I try to figure out when I'm using reuse, or I'm bringing my bag to the store, I'm bringing my water bottle, what I've started to notice is, what happens when it's not working, when I forget my bag, when I forget my water bottle? And then I think about, what could that organization do to make it easier for me as a consumer to use a system? So, for example, if I'm in a grocery store and I forget my bag, it would be much easier if that grocery store had bags there ready to use, and maybe just a deposit, and you keep that bag within the system in the store. So for me, it's not even so much about the practice or the dent, but it's also, how can I figure out the system? And then how can I communicate that to that corporation and say, if you make this intervention, that would take this amount of plastic. I mean, just think about the organization or the convention that we're in right now. And I know Joe was saying just really how the need to get away from plastic. We make a decision to have, glass of water, or have real plates and real forks. How much plastic was saved, or was saved from him making that, or from the organization, the organizers making that decision? So thinking along those lines, what can we communicate to those bigger organizations to have that bigger impact?
Well, I think, and then also using your power to impact policy and legislation, right? And educating yourself. And then, one of the things too, why the recycling myth works is because when we don't want to just throw that bottle away, we want to feel like we are doing something good, even when we know it really is not making an impact. If you're going to recycle it, it's going to be recycled in a community like mine, and it's really not going to do any good. So sometimes you actually taking that plastic bottle and throwing it away and understanding this is waste. At least you feel it, right? At least it comes with a consequence. And if we stopped trying to avoid the way consequences feel, maybe we would make better actions. I want to say too that even when you recycle plastic, it has more chemicals that's added into it. It causes more pollution when you recycle plastic than virgin plastic production. So as Joy said, there is no way to get away from the damage that's being caused by it. You can't sort it out in those bins and it goes away. I'm sorry, it doesn't work.
Thank you so much for those important points. I think it's really important to note that recycling is such a broad spectrum, isn't it? From people doing it as a kind of cottage industry, but melting plastic and breathing in the chemicals that it's releasing, to these big industries, which things like advanced recycling are just another form of heavy industry and very energy intensive and polluting as well. We've got time for a couple more questions. I did see one at the front. Yep, great, thank you.
Hi.
And one at the back there.
Hi, my name is Afsha, coming in from Malawi. Work at a hospital with permaculture and nutrition. Thank you for your really inspiring presentation. I think in Malawi, there's two parts to this. In Malawi, we have a very vibrant sugar industry. It's very monocropped. It actually runs across one of our primary rivers, Shire River, and it really reflects as well what you were showing. And I think, it's a company that has very fancy ESG frameworks, a lot of greenwashing entailed, and they're planting right across. But it's also something that the Malawian community and the locals are very dependent on. And recently it's been a huge issue because sugar hasn't been available, whether it's being prioritized for export and the local communities aren't able to consume it, and it's also packaged. So you're bringing that entire system into place. So I wonder, it's a two-part question, what your advice would be, and I think it's following on to the lady in the front there as well, because the single-use plastics, and I think Joe is very aware as well in Malawi, is promoted by this big conglomerate of companies that's almost like a mafia in Malawi. And we have the plastic ban, the single-use plastic ban. I know the UN Plastics Treaty is very active in Malawi as well. But you're fighting these large companies, there's a few of them, owned by very wealthy people who have no understanding of the downstream impact, who actually possibly don't even care.
Right.
And then you have the communities from vulnerable settings, and for them it's affordability. I can pack my 100 milliliters of oil in this blue plastic bag and take it home and use it for the week, and the salt and the sugar, all of those simple commodities that they utilize. So I wonder what your advice would be to that, because we're constantly trying, the cleanups, the alternatives, but from an affordability perspective and being like, oh, it's easier for me to just use this blue plastic bag that's single use rather than actually carry a container or bring something else. So I wonder just what your experiences have been with that within some of the vulnerable spaces.
It's a good, of course, all great questions. First of all, I think the association of plastic as being cheap is a myth that we have to dissolve, because it's not cheap when you consider the impact it has to communities, to health, to access to clean water, and the damage. It's really quite expensive. But how do you have a community recognize this when they need to eat, or they just need to save a couple of dollars? So that's a hard question. Reuse systems have been shown to actually save money. So I think trying to work and support systems of reuse where someone can bring a small container and fill and get what they need instead of having to buy a big bulky package is one way to at least start assisting when communities need that. Because the problem is you're getting a big jug of something, and usually most of that is just water. You're paying for the water. You're not really paying for the product when you could actually buy the concentrate at a much smaller level and have to use less packaging. So what ways can we help to help communities to where they're not having to have big bulky products and instead use items that can be easier to transport? It's also a reason why, even with bag bans or bag fees, that can be detrimental to communities for affordability. Is it right to charge someone a quarter when they forget their bag, and it's a person who needs to work and get home, and it's another stress that you're adding on to the consumer, especially one who's vulnerable? So all of that matters, and I really think going to utilizing more reuse systems is the best way. And what can we do to improve those systems and provide them? And I just want to add to that, of course, educating the community and really addressing, like you stood up with such a heart for the needs of the community. And I think that continued outreach and education it takes a while, and it may seem like it's not reaching people, but I can tell you that even in things are not very easy in America right now, as you may have sensed. But even in the most difficult of times, the work that was done 10 years ago is now having some impact now. It's been having impact all along. So even when you think that it's not working, it is working. More and more people are getting educated. You're just developing that critical mass in order to make the movement, but continue to reach out and have as much concern as you have with your local community. And again, like Joe said, think about those systems.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And unfortunately, we're going to have to cut the session there, but I think that's a fantastic place to end on some positive thoughts going forwards. So I'd just like to, again, please warmly thank our two wonderful guest speakers for their fantastic sessions.
Thank you.
And we just have a brief announcement, but I hope that this segues nicely into a fantastic research conference and many exciting sessions that are really going to pick apart some of the themes that we've heard about today.